Alright, so you bought a 7.3. This video is for you. Before I go into a lot of detail on the later model, the turbo versions, I want to show you the IDI, the non-turbo. I want to show you how you lucked out if you bought an OBS truck. You got these high quality components in here. They last a long time. And you got these awesome, super long lasting springs that hold your hood open. You lucky dog. And I don't know if this is true on the middle years, but these hoses right here, these are the return lines. I'm pretty sure any of the OBS 7.3s are going to have the return lines set up like that. I'm not for sure. This is a 91, and then that truck over there, that flatbed truck over there, is a 2001. So not for sure what goes on between those years. Obviously you can see that the fuel filter setup was a totally different thing before the turbo was put on the engine. The 7.3 is indeed, as promised, one of the finest engines available. You know, it's better to use the Ford components whenever possible. You know, unless, you know, it's just aftermarket components can be very hard to trust, and they don't really do a very good job of imitating the technology that's inside there. So this is my flatbed Ford. Now that one over there was a flatbed too, and it was a long flatbed. They had actually cut the frame rails and extended it with, like, I don't know how many feet of frame rail. It was a 14-foot bed, I think, and it was just a flatbed with 2x8s actually, or all around the sides. And I put plywood on there with tall stakes to hold all my wood and stuff, and use it as a chipper truck. And then later I bought a red chipper truck that was a Chevy, and then the Chevy blew up, the engine blew up, and so I took the dump and everything and I put it on this truck to make it into my chipper truck. And now it actually dumps like a chipper truck should. But anyway, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Ford series. So one of the critical things that you need to know about these is that you have a harness to your glow plugs that you can check. And here's one. There's a harness right there. You see that harness? Okay. That is the control harness for your injectors and your glow plugs, okay? Now you got, I'm just gonna describe it to you. You got gray wires on, you got 4 gray wires, okay? 2 on this end and 2 on that end. And then you have wires in the middle that sends your power, your signal to your injectors, telling them to open and let high pressure oil push the fuel in, okay? So first thing you need to do is obviously check your relay, your glow plug relay. You know, the glow plug relay gets battery voltage and engages the big stud, gets 12 volts, and that's how it runs the glow plugs. And your glow plugs relay, the timer in the computer is set to run the glow plugs for kind of a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but I think I tested mine repeatedly over like a 3-minute period, and it continued to stay on. Some people say it can go as long as 5 minutes, but you don't have to recycle the key every 30 seconds. You just turn it forward and leave it. And even when that glow plug light cuts out, you should still be getting hot. And you can test that just by unplugging that harness and just take a voltmeter. Obviously black goes to your battery ground, and then you take the negative lead of that and you probe where the gray wires are at the two end wires on that harness on either end, and make sure those are getting battery voltage like they're supposed to. Then what you do is you take your voltmeter, you put it on resistance, and then you check resistance from where, you know, the plug of the actual harness of the actual, it's actually a seal, okay, the valve cover seal, but it's also a harness. And you test the end pins that go to the glow plugs, and you just touch the pin, and then you touch ground, and you check resistance. And what you should get when you check resistance is you should get a continuity, which means that your voltmeter is going to beep at you. So if you have a separate test for continuity or resistance, you're going to want to go for continuity, and you're going to touch that. And if it's got continuity to ground, then that means that the glow plugs are probably still good. Okay, don't waste your time pulling all that stuff apart, replacing glow plugs if you haven't done this test. Most likely, if your glow plugs are getting juice, they're probably not ruined, unless your truck is an ether baby, and you probably won't know that until you successfully start it. You have a high pressure oil pump. It is underneath this reservoir right here is your high pressure oil reservoir, or actually that's your low pressure oil reservoir. If you're not reading low pressure oil, you're not getting high pressure oil, okay? Now, what happens is if a truck doesn't start for a long time, this reservoir can get low. You can cheat your way through this by unscrewing that Allen right there and adding oil through that hole. It's a teeny tiny hole. But if you fill this reservoir up, you can improve your chances a little bit, because what's happening is you're cranking the engine over and trying to fill this reservoir with oil so that there's enough oil in here to supply the high pressure pump. Okay, your high pressure pump is hiding. It's underneath there. There's part of it. There's that red hose right there comes out of it and supplies the head with high pressure oil. Okay, now on the middle year, the OBS models, right in this valley right here, there's going to be a mechanical lift pump. Okay, it's not going to be electric unless it's been modified from the original, from the factory. And this leads me to my next point. This truck right here gave me lots of headaches with startups. Okay, whenever I would run out of fuel, it was awful. It was just awful trying to get this thing to start. This truck has a mechanical lift pump on the side of the engine, on the passenger side, kind of down lower, and I replaced that. Didn't solve anything, because what happens is you're using suction to pull fuel all the way from back there to up here, and anywhere the air can get in, you're pulling in a massive stream of air bubbles in with your fuel, and it's preventing your truck from starting. Okay, to alleviate this problem, what I did is, I'm not going to show you the pump, but I'll just tell you, I bought it at O'Reilly's for 80 bucks, and I mounted it under the frame rail here, okay? Fuel lines run along this frame rail inside here, and you just get under there, you cut the lines, you install yourself a nice electric fuel pump, and then you give yourself a switch that you can turn it on and off. Now, you do need this to be powered through a relay, I believe. But you figure out how to wire that and put yourself an electric fuel pump. I only need to use this some of the time. So if I'm having trouble starting, I'll flip that switch and I'll get that electric fuel pump running, and it adds, you know, electric powered fuel pressure, which is far superior to a mechanical lift pump in terms of getting an old truck started, okay? And it's only $100 investment, and it'll save you if you ever run out of fuel. And yes, to that end, mechanical lift pumps almost never fail, but what happens is because they're only working when the engine is turning over, you got to crank it over a lot to get it to start. So that's going to save you from that situation. And as you're cranking, especially if your fuel is not being burned in the engine because the combustion process is not taking place, fuel is coming out there. It's got to go in and it's got to go out, okay? If fuel is going in, fuel is going out, then your fuel delivery system is working, okay? Let's set the record straight on some serious issue too. Lots and lots of injectors getting replaced out there that don't need to be, okay? Don't replace the injectors if you don't really need to. It's kind of a waste. It's a waste of money. If white gaseous diesel is not coming out of your tailpipe, the injectors are not the problem, because all your injectors are not going to not fire all at the same time, because of being bad injectors. And injectors fail one at a time, like coil packs, okay? They are one or two at a time. And typically, even then, if there's more than one of them participating in the failure, it's more related to a computerized issue. Obviously, your air filter is hyper important, okay? Well, this is the old fuel pump from my 7.3. This is not the same as the later models when they did the Powerstroke. Okay, this device right here is called your IPR, Injector Pressure Regulator. I think I paid like $300 and change to get one of these from Ford. You can get them for less online. I changed out the nut on mine so it looks a little different, but this device is simply a very complex internal mechanism that is able to control the amount of oil flow and then there's a solenoid here that actually controls it. So this solenoid is just a sleeve and it goes over top of that. So this device is working in relationship with, let's see if I can find it here. Here we go, this device, okay? Now, I will help show you the locations of these things. This is called the ICP sensor, okay? Injector control pressure sensor. This is a sensor that senses in the fuel rail how much your high pressure oil is, how much pressure you're getting in your high pressure oil rail. This is the device that the computer uses to control high pressure, okay? This is called an IPR. This is called an ICP. So one of the things that can happen is an ICP will fail and you can't start. All right. Another thing that can happen for no starts, before we show you where these parts are located on the truck, is your camshaft position sensor. I can't remember if it's crank or cam position sensor, but there's only one of those two sensors on this truck. So the camshaft position sensor is going to be, let's see here, brighten up. Down in this area, it's kind of below this stuff. It's kind of hard to reach from the top or the bottom. It's at like a middle point in the truck. So when you lay on your back, you almost can't reach it, but it's really obvious. It's got two wires and it's got a little metal bracket that it goes into. Well, this is what it looks like, and the unit actually has like a forked bracket that goes on it like this and holds it onto the truck. So there's a screw that holds it in like this, and then there's the forked bracket that holds it down that way. So sorry, but mine doesn't have the bracket, but it's easy to find. As far as your ICP, all right, injector control pressure sensor is going to be right here on this top of the rail. It's got a two-prong wire. You got to check and make sure your wires are good. These wires love to fail and make you think your sensors are bad, and then you're spending, you know, 300 or whatever on that IPR, and then you're spending like whatever 180 or 200 or something on this ICP, and it might not even be bad. You can unplug this ICP and see if that will help you start the truck. That is a great thing to try before you go spending money. The IPR is down here. Let's see. So down below here I have orange tape on it, okay? That is the harness that goes to the IPR. You can see the wire plug there in the center. Okay, so on the back of the IPR there is a tin nut, and oftentimes there will be a non-running vehicle just because this plug is not plugged in properly, okay? Also, it has a little rubber connector on that plug, like a little waterproofing type dinghy, and if that dinghy is not in there, then that connector will not be getting good connection and the IPR will not function and you will not have high pressure oil, okay? I do not know when they started having this on the 7.3s, but the first thing you need to do once you have a 7.3 is get OBD Link EX connector and get the Forscan software on your laptop. Forscan can record when you're driving or trying to start the vehicle. Forscan can show you things about your truck as you're going, okay? So, for example, it can show you as you're trying to start the vehicle, it'll show you there's an IPR for what percentage is the IPR being activated to. It can show you whether the ICP is getting pressure. It'll tell you the oil pressure that the ICP is reading. This is critical because if you're not getting IC pressure at the fuel rail, then your truck won't start, okay? So this is just way easier than having to do all the mechanical testing. You can do the mechanical testing for fuel pressure, but you're gonna have to go buy a bunch of little hydraulic fittings and hydraulic hoses and fluid-filled gauges and all that fun stuff just to do all these tests. Meanwhile, you could have just done it by hooking a computer up to your truck. You'll need a laptop and that little dongle. Like I said, just look up Forscan, F-O-R-S-C-A-N. To help you identify the relays that you need to look at here in case you don't know what they are. On mine at least, this one I believe is the glow plug relay. Let's see. Yep, because it's got yellow and brown here, and those yellow and brown things go into the injector harness on the gray side. So the gray is like closer to you and then farther away. And also too, if that harness is somehow disconnected or wires exposed or anything like that, the truck might run only on one side. So you can unplug the harness on one side and the truck will run for a couple seconds, and it rattles a lot and vibrates, and that is almost kind of a good sign that you're just connected on one side with the harness. They like to get disconnected, and a lot of time on the older ones too, the harness gets disconnected internally, so you do have to take the valve covers off and look and make sure that harness is connected. But I wouldn't do that unless you actually know that your injectors are not connected first by probing the connections in there, okay? Because you can ohm test the injectors on those middler wires, and on the outer gray wires, which you can see here where my fingertip is, you can check your glow plugs for continuity like you're supposed to, okay? And then obviously, yeah, your fuel filter, air filter is a super big deal on this thing. See, I believe that's your oil pressure sensor right there, okay? That's your low pressure oil sensor. The basic set of guidance for this truck not starting is, you know, is the air filter clean? Is the fuel pump delivering fuel all the way to where it should be? Which means, you know, obviously you can check your fuel, whether you're getting a little fuel, but that's not telling you whether you're getting air in there with your fuel too. So you need to verify that you're getting fuel pressure. That can be a little tougher. There's no fuel pressure sensor on this truck to start with. But you need to know that you're getting fuel pressure. It's not the same thing. So fuel pressure, I mean before you get to the high pressure part of the system, okay? Since the high pressure part comes from the oil, you need to know that what's going into your injectors is pure diesel and not diesel mixed with air. And you also need to know that it's coming in at the pressure prescribed. That's something you have to find online, but it's a simple number. I'm sure there's somebody out there who's advised what that number is. I think on my truck they said like 60 psi, 40 to 60 psi. So if it's an electric fuel pump, I would expect to see that. And obviously if you have rubber hoses coming out of the fuel pump, it shouldn't be too hard to hook up something, some sort of a pressure gauge to that on those hoses with just a little hose barb or something. So fuel pressure, big deal, okay? So you know you've got fuel pressure, but there's no white smoke coming out the tailpipe when you're cranking. Is your truck showing, you know, when you have a no-start condition on these trucks and you continue to try to start it, eventually you're going to see low pressure oil reading on your dashboard. Right here. That should go up, okay? If that doesn't go up, you're not getting a low pressure oil reading yet. It doesn't mean you don't have, but you know, obviously there should be oil in the truck. Once you know that you have high pressure oil, now, another thing that you can do is you can unscrew the injector control pressure sensor from the top of the valve cover on the driver's side, and there's only one of it. And you unscrew that, and then when you're cranking, you see if oil is coming out. So that's the way you can, if the oil should come out kind of hard, and it could come out in shots. So, psh, 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 like that, while you're cranking. It'll make a huge mess, but you would know that oil is coming out of your high pressure oil pump at that time. But I wouldn't do that until you see that you have low pressure oil. So verifying your oil pressure is going to be the next element. And then once you know that you have the correct oil pressure, you know, another thing too is unplugging the ICP. So if your ICP sensor is bad, unplugging it can make the truck start. And they also can fail intermittently, okay? But just be aware, please, I beg you, check the wires, check the connections between where those wires go to the sensor, because the wires to the IPR and the ICP get exposed to a lot of heat, a lot of fluids, a lot of cleaning, you know, when people have issues with the truck, they go out there and mess with them and stuff, and they get exposed, okay? The wires just get openly exposed, and if the IPR wires are exposed, they're right next to each other, you look inside the back of the plug, and in the back of there, it'll just be like a bunch of marshmallow fluff, just all squishy and disgusting, and the wires would be just bare copper, and they could be touching each other in there, so obviously they're not magnetizing the solenoid on the IPR, and you need those wires to be connected to just the IPR. If they're heating each other, all they're doing is short-circuiting past the IPR. It's not going to fire because the IPR isn't opening up and allowing high-pressure oil to go to your rail. But again, you're going to know that by seeing that whether or not there's high-pressure oil, which again you can do with Forscan, assuming that your ICP is good. And you know, then like I said, there's a series of tests to tell whether your ICP is bad or not. But it's fairly simple, and there's tons of data about it online. So once you know you have the high pressure oil, at that point, now you're looking for an electrical problem. I wouldn't look for an electrical problem or an injector problem or even a high pressure pump problem until I had already checked all these things: air, fuel pressure from your low lift pump, and oil pressure. If you have oil pressure and you're not getting fuel out of the tailpipe, then it's time to start looking at why are my injectors not firing. But I sincerely doubt that the injectors would not be firing. There is a module on the truck that can cause a ton of problems. It's called an injector drive module, I think. And people who have had problems with that have raised hell trying to figure out what was wrong with their truck before finally discovering that little module was the issue. But like I said, you can for sure check fuel pressure and oil pressure, and I think majority of the time those are going to be the major issues. Another thing that can happen too is if your injector seals are bad, oil could just be like gushing out of the seals, and it's not pressurizing enough of your injectors to even allow the truck to run. But I would expect the truck to run on 4 cylinders, to be honest with you. It would be like a crappy start, and it would run for a minute. So I don't know, but again, the oil pressure, big thing, okay? And then once you've done that, then you can move forward in your process and go to the more aggravating parts of the check. So congratulations on your new 7.3. I'm very happy for you, and it's been one of the most rewarding things I've ever worked on. It's been incredibly expensive, and I've spent tons of money on stuff that I probably didn't need, but I learned so much in the process, and I've pretty much committed myself to the truck at this point. I doubt I would be able to recover the money I've put into it, but that's not what I bought it for, and that's not what you should be buying one of these trucks for. You buy it for yourself, buy it for your business or something, or a family member. But so good luck out there, and happy fixing.